while we're getting settled, I'm going to go ahead and cue John to play a message from the online art publication Glass Tire, who is our beloved sponsor for tonight's program. So, John, you want to go ahead and play that? Okay, thank you to Glass Tire and to all of you for joining us tonight. I'm Terry Thornton, Curator of Education at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. And as we proceed, I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the unceded land of the Kickapoo, Wichita, Tawakoni, the Humano, and the Comanche people. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Being There Tuesday Evenings with the Modern, the museum's online alternative to the long-running lecture series Tuesday Evenings at the Modern. This then is devoted to only exhibition-related presentations, meaning fewer but top-of-the-line lectures, making each all the more special, and that is certainly the case tonight, as we have the curator of I Will Greet the Sun Again, Ed Schad, and in conversation with the artist to whom we owe the evening, Shirin Neshat. Their conversation and presentation will be followed by a Q&A, which is generated by you. So as the presentation proceeds, you can type your questions by accessing Zoom's Q&A tab. And in the end, Shirin and Ed will entertain as many questions as time allows. So while I feel that you are likely familiar with our honored guest this evening, I would like to briefly introduce them as a show of appreciation and as a setup for tonight's program. Ed Schad is in his position as curator at the Broad in LA, is, as mentioned, the curator of the Modern's upcoming exhibition, I Will Greet the Sun Again, which originated at the Broad and opens to the public here this coming Sunday, the 28th. At the Broad, Ed is both curator and publications manager. In addition to his curating and editing for the Broad, Ed's writing has been included in Art Review, Frieze, Modern Painters, Flash Art, the Brooklyn Rail, the LA Weekly, Truth Dig, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. He has also contributed essays to monographic catalogs on the work of Robert Irwin, Sterling Ruby, Kaz Oshiro, and many others. And of note, for the last 3 years, Ed has taught writing at Claremont Graduate University. Shirin Neshat is an Iranian-born artist and filmmaker living in New York. As a conceptual artist, Shirin's reputation precedes her. Recognized internationally for the significant mark she has made on the art world and beyond, with work that is ambitious in its form while both challenging and instructive in its content. Working in concert with poetry, philosophy, the paradoxical, and the personal to achieve something that both mystifies and strikes a chord, Shirin Neshat's work has been featured in exhibitions across the globe. A list too long to parse, but I will mention that her inclusion in the 48th Venice Biennale brought with it the ultimate recognition as she received that year's Golden Lion Award. And in addition to other notable awards, Shirin's 2009 feature-length film, Women Without Men, was awarded the Silver Lion for Best Director at the 66th Venice International Film Festival. She is represented by Gladstone Gallery in Brussels, as well as in New York, where the exhibition Land of Dreams closes this Saturday. So if any of you are coming to us from New York, you need to make your way to Gladstone Gallery before the weekend. And also represented by Goodman Gallery in London, Johannesburg, and Cape Town. There is so much more to share about both Ed and Shirin, but since we should take advantage of the time we have them with us in conversation for tonight's special program, I will leave it at that. So please join me from your various locations in a warm welcome for Shirin Neshat and Ed Schad. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you, Terry. Hello, Shirin. It's good to see you. Haven't seen each other in several months, but we're navigating the pandemic. I do, at the outset, want to send my thoughts to Texas, who I know is trying to recover from the horrible storms. My family lives in Valley View, Texas, north of Fort Worth, which is where I grew up. I'm very sad not to be with you in person, but my heart, and I know Shirin's heart as well, goes out to everyone involved by the storms and by COVID-19, who, well, it seems like a who, but it's an it. It has forced us into this space, onto the computer. But anyway, thank you for being here. So I spoke, Shirin and I spoke about the content of this talk. We have about 40 minutes. When you do, and I definitely hope that you'll get the opportunity to see the installation at the Modern, which is currently being installed beautifully by Andrea Carnes, Tony Wright, Brent Mitchell, and their whole team are doing a fantastic job. Thank you to all of them. I hope you'll get to see it in person, but this talk, we're hoping, gives you a pretty good indication of what you're going to see. But we're going to do it in a slightly unusual way. We're going to introduce what you're going to see by what you're going to see last, which is a project that is debuting in this exhibition called Land of Dreams. And the reason we've chosen to introduce the talk this way is that Land of Dreams is really a culmination of form in the work that you'll see at the exhibition. And I'd like to ask Shirin a lot of questions about this, but Land of Dreams is a project, and you see aspects of it on the screen in front of you. To the left, 2 channels of video projection, and to the right, photography installation. And then in the next slide, you'll see individual portraits. So when you look at the 30 years that Shirin has been making art, Land of Dreams as a project really tracks through her earliest concerns with portrait photography into her innovations with video installation and the experience, the physical experience of watching video and film. And finally, monumental photography installation. Many of her projects have come to really bear extraordinary witness to events like the Green Movement in Iran, the Arab Spring as seen through the lens of people living in Egypt who experienced the events, to projects that we'll talk about in the present. So we're going to show a clip, but before doing that, Shirin, I'm so happy to introduce this extraordinary project. I wondered if you might say a few words to start us off about the project Land of Dreams, and maybe introduce the clip that we're about to see.
Yes, and I just want to say hello to our friends and say that my thoughts have been with Texas since the many past days, and I'm so glad everything is improving. And I also wanted to thank the museum, and especially Andrea Carnes, for her persistency in doing something with me, and for her to agree to take on this massive exhibition. And thank you, Ed, for creating an exhibition that makes me so proud. Land of Dreams, I was thinking about it today. There's so many ways that I can describe the nature of this project, but I think what I'd like to start with is, and we can talk about it after, it's really my personal perspective about America. It's a country, it's really a perspective of an immigrant, someone who's been given a home here, that I'm not native here, but I have lived in this country longer than I have lived in my own country, and that I have grown to love and hate aspects of this country. And there's a lot of duality in this project, and we're about to see the video. And I think very much in line of my previous work, it just sort of evolves around all kinds of notions of opposites. Iran, US, dream, reality, natural landscape, artificial landscape. And the one thing that runs through the both worlds is this Iranian woman photographer who's an extension of my own self and my own alter ego. So it's really a conversation between an individual's plight as this one person on this planet versus a kind of a social, cultural critique of the American society. So I would say, why don't we look at it and then come back and talk more about it?
Wonderful.
Ed, I should have given a little background to our audience that the, the video was shot in New Mexico, and the photographs were also shot in New Mexico. And it basically the story of a photographer who is kind of an agent or a spy for this a very peculiar colony, Iranian colony that are tucked inside of a mountain. And basically she collects people's photographs, portraits, and dreams from different households in this small town, and brings them back to the colony where they receive, analyze, and selects and analyze them. And so it's a kind of absurd, kind of satirical narrative.
Yeah, so wonderful. Thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed the clip. We tried to choose a spot to convince you to come to the Modern and see the rest of it. But Samin, the photographer played by Sheila Van in the film, at the moment where the clip ended, she's about to enter the households of Americans, Americans that come from a variety of backgrounds. And in going into their homes, Samin is on one hand intent to take their portrait, but she's also intent to record their dreams, and some of them are forthcoming in the dreams that they tell. But Shirin, the dreams, I love how specific they are. Could you tell us a little bit about the content of some of the dreams that people will encounter at the Modern? And some of the driving force behind those narratives.
Yeah, one of the things I was really interested in is that dreams are very common and they cross cultural boundaries and differences. And when you really look at it, American people's dream or nightmares are not that different than Iranians or Europeans or Africans. There is a common thread of fear, of loss, of abandonment, displacement, violence, alienation, and particularly in this time that we live in, our fears are very common, our anxieties are very common. So as this young woman, who's supposedly like the enemy or the spy, goes house to house, visiting people from different economic and ethnic backgrounds, and she hears their dreams and their stories, she's recalling her own dreams and understanding that, she does the forbidden. She begins to emotionally identify with her subjects, which is not allowed in her authoritarian environment in that colony. And sort of she bites the apple in the Garden of Eden kind of thing. So we were very careful about selecting the type of dreams. For example, a gentleman from the military recalls as sort of in New Mexico where they tested one of the first atomic bombs, his dreams are about nuclear holocaust. This lady right here, the Native American, her nightmare evolves around her child being taken away to a convent to be, converted. And this is something that happened to her as a young child, where they were systematically taken away from their families for years and years so they can forget their language and religion. Or the lady who's an immigrant in the video, where she's been displaced and forced by violence to leave her home, whether it's Sarajevo or God knows so many places where leads to a lot of refugees. So her nightmares are about the loss of home. So we were very careful about thematically to choose dreams that somehow project certain common human anxiety at this moment. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love in the next slide, we'll get to see the gentleman. And I get the impression that he probably worked for maybe the White Sands missile facility in New Mexico. But one of the things that I love about this particular dream is that the discussion about nuclear weapons, especially in terms of the United States and Iran, is always a nationalistic discourse. But you in this film bring it to a single person, his experiences, his personal trauma of interacting with those weapons, of dreaming that dream about the work that he has done. And if you continue on with the slides into the next one. Land of Dreams is really a collection of these individual personalities. And when you see them installed on the walls at the Modern, I guess I could say I wasn't surprised knowing your work very well, but these portraits really enter into a tradition of monumental projects of documenting peoples globally, but here the lens is turned to the United States. And in the next slide, sorry, one more. Ultimately, this identification, this empathy, this project of Samin, which is another way of saying your project, comes at peril, comes at a situation at the end of the film where she encounters this man. And I wonder wonder if you might talk a little bit about the crescendo of the film, who this gentleman is, and what's at stake for Samin in collecting these dreams.
I have to say that there was a lot of absurdity woven into the narrative. Obviously, as you can tell, politics has become this theater of absurdity, whether it is Trump in America or in Iran. And I think the satirical nature of this video, for example, the facility that they're reviewing people's dreams and portraits, it really should be a facility for nuclear energy. And so we played with that, pushing that absurdity in terms of, and how Iranian government would want to spy on Americans by spying on their dreams and their subconscious. I mean, these are really funny material, but the sense of hierarchy, the fear of, the judge. I mean, we are from Iran, and we have grown up with all kinds of notions of fear. If before was the Shah, and then after the revolution was the spiritual leader, and the people who ran the country through fanaticism and their faith, but really it was extremely violent and oppressive, and it's torn people apart. And opposite in this country where I felt very safe and very secure, and as an immigrant, and in the past few years, I felt there was an element that I felt that about American society that worried me, and how it, in a very worrisome way, started to echo my memories of Iran in terms of, the rise of racism and white supremacy and political injustice and corruption and all of that. So I think that, this man, obviously, actually he's an actor that I always bring back, and he always plays a bad guy, but he represents that model of a spiritual leader, people like myself fear. And that in this case, he's even been able to detect what Samin has been doing secretly, and he can read through her subconscious. And this is, the plight of Iranian people. We live under dictatorship, and this environment of this, Iranian colony, it's a kind of representation in a very fictionalized and surreal way of how bad it is, that how we always have to be silent and and the, you know, the fear of the hierarchy. And so for me, that's what represented to her is this figure that, you know, she was terrified of.
Well, I should tell, when you see the film at the Modern, he's a tremendous actor, and he has just one of those all-time voices that can quickly entrance you. But he talks about one of the dreams, the fact that Samin has encountered a chameleon, and though I can't remember, I think it's. I wouldn't presume to pronounce the Persian word for chameleon, but it's an incredible moment in the film because Samin is identifying with the chameleon. As the photographer, she is allowed to hide in plain sight. She is able to enter people's dreams. And that's exactly where nationalities, politics, ideologies start to slide into a more indeterminate space.
Yes.
But this is a great time to maybe go back earlier in your career. If we could see the next slide. This emphasis on being behind the camera, being a photographer as a witness to your experiences, taking portraits to explore things that need to be understood, perhaps are not understood as well as they need to be. And so this series that you see on the screen, The Women of Allah, was completed in the 1990s. And I wonder if you might say a few words about these early moments with portraiture and getting into, whether it was through one of your friends that you photographed or yourself, as we see in 3 different examples here in front of us, how you used portrait photography to identify with the many different voices that you encountered in Iran when you returned after being away for so many years.
I want to start by saying that what I find fascinating about our exhibition, I Will Greet the Sun Again, is exactly how you decided to begin with the Woman of Allah and end with the Land of Dreams, because it is really very truthful in my journey as a human being and as a visual artist, meaning that when I made this work, a series of self-portraiture, was me looking at Iran from a distance and sort of trying to not just offer, but get a cultural reading about the revolution, Iran after the revolution, but from a distance. I was no longer there, and so I was an outsider. And so by photographing myself, my own portrait, I tried to embody, like play a role like someone else. But I knew that I could convey those emotions through my eyes and through my body. Now, with the Land of Dreams, once again, it becomes very personal. Now I turn my lens toward America, a country where I live. I live longer than my own country, but I'm still an outsider. I'm still in distance. I'm an outcast. I'm not really American. I'm not really Iranian. And I am now putting my writing and handwork and my camera on other people's faces. But it's really, they become my own extension. And this woman character becomes me. Like what I was in these photographs is now Simin in the Land of Dreams. So it's a series of investigations, and the human body, human portraiture is the way I feel like I can use as a canvas to talk about humanity, if that makes sense. I don't have a paintbrush, I don't paint, I don't make sculptures. To me, the human body, human figure is my canvas. And the expression that I can get through the gaze, through the mouth, through the hand, through the feet, which are what I feel like being a Muslim, I've learned to reduce to those elements, because we were always told not to capture anything else in our bodies. But yet I feel with these limitations, you can express so much. And I feel that nothing is more powerful than human portraiture in terms of what it says in its minimalism. But I think it's very interesting to go back to the beginning of the show and the end of the show and see how the certain parallels, this connection, this parallel between the self and the world, the inner, the outer, the political, the spiritual, the mystical, the violent versus the religious, all of these dualities, all of this material that intuitively I approach at the very earliest point of my career, my artistic practice, now still continue in a different way, but today as my latest work.
One of the things as preparing for the talk, I'm not sure it's something I understood until the last couple of days, but these early portraits and your use, photography is the medium, but there is a medium here in another sense, almost like a conjuring of spirits. And the conjuring of spirits in these photographs occur through poetry. We get to know various voices inside of Iran through the textures of poetic language. The self-portrait on the left features the poetry of Farooq Farkhzad, and Tehere Safarzeh appears on the portrait in the middle. And it struck me that all the way into the land of dreams, that in Iran, the medium of poetry is very similar to the medium of dreaming. Symbols collect and gain meaning over the course of 1,000 years, 5,000 years. And so in Land of Dreams and in The Women of Allah, the dreams and the poetry connect in a profound way.
Absolutely. I think that for the friends who know a little bit about the Iranian culture, they know the history and the place of literature, from poetry to fiction, from ancient to modern to contemporary time. And I think sometimes psychologically, emotionally, some of the reason that the Iranian people have so depended on metaphoric, allegorical language or fiction or poetry is because of years of dictatorship and censorship. And by creating fiction and creating this abstract form of communication, you create a different universe, just like dreams, where you have all these references reality, but you don't really land on reality. And I think that gives you a lot of freedom in terms of being subversive, and saying things that no one can detect, while commonly people understand. But also, I think in that nature, for example, magic realism, surrealism, are the kind of languages that a lot of countries like in Iran, writers use. I've turned Woman Without Men was a magic realist novel that I turned into a film. I myself feel like I'm a surrealistic artist because in this way, not only you can escape simple criticism and censorship, but also there's a universality in that realm that you can actually transcend the specificities of a culture and reach a place that really communicates to a larger audience, a public. And I think that's part of the attraction of people who embrace surrealism. And one thing I want to mention, this relationship between dreams and photography, I think it's very beautiful. It's very poetic because photography is about freezing a moment, capturing a very special moment of time. But dreams are ephemeral, they vanish. they never stay. You cannot freeze a dream. In fact, they become stories, like Jean-Claude Carrier said. So I love this poetic relationship between photography and its permanency versus dreams that are so impermanent, non-tangible. And I think that for a lot of great poets of Iran who have lived very hard time in their country for their artistry, poetry and their literature has been the only way to stay in their imagination and survive their lives, their very difficult lives.
I think that extraordinarily well put. I wanted to key in on one thing that you just said about photography fixing a face, fixing a moment in time. There is a sense, at least to me, in your work that there was a moment where that recognition of photography as a fixed medium gave way to moving images that invited the ephemeral movement of physical film into your work. And so maybe we should move and see a clip from one of your films and talk about that movement from photography into the moving image. So John, if you wouldn't mind skipping ahead a couple of slides and showing a clip from a film made in 1998 called Rapture, which was filmed in Essaouira, Morocco, which we'll talk about a little more after this brief 2-minute clip. Wonderful. So the reason why I chose that particular clip from Rapture, and if we wouldn't mind advancing a couple of slides to the image from Rapture. Yes, thank you. we saw in your self-portraits earlier, your body is front and center in those portraits. But one of the things that is really striking about your video installations, and for those on the call that are unfamiliar with Shirin's video installations, they're projected on two different screens. And you interact with the screens physically. And so it's not so much Shirin's body as in the portraiture, but it's your body as the viewer. You are involved in an allegorical narrative physically. This is a very unusual thing to do, especially in 1998. A lot of people do that now. But I wondered if you could speak about that idea of getting a viewer involved in your experiences, in your dualities as someone who inhabits multiple cultures, multiple countries, multiple realities. Yes.
Yeah, first of all, the move toward video to the motion picture was partially a reaction against my own work, which was The Woman of Allah, and how politically charged it was, and how frustrated I felt by the way it was, the reading of it was so reduced to certain judgment that went beyond the work itself. So I almost rebelled against my own signature work, which by then was becoming popular. Actually, this video was shot in 1999 after Turbulent, which was shot in 1998. I had never done videos, and actually watching this clip that I just saw, it made me realize how primitive and naive I was in terms of, what I was doing with the editing or with the idea. It was really a ritual that I just sort of made up, and I think that one thing that I realized that would be very interesting is to engage the audience in a way that, unlike the movie theaters where people are seated passively in watching a film, that here the audience, both in Turbulence and in Rapture, are seated in between the two screens that are playing simultaneously. And the viewer then not only creates this almost kind of sculptural experience as, you're in the middle of these two giant screens, but also that the audience become like the editor of the narrative. They have to decide which side they should look next. And there are moments where the woman becomes more passive and the man become active, and then the men become passive and the woman become active. So there is this game going on, but there is no way that the audience could just sit there and be entertained. They must take participation in the way that this piece is, read, and the meaning of it. And there was something about it I enjoyed, because it really asked the audience to be active in this work. And not only just physically, but also in the reading of the work. And I enjoyed that a lot. And oddly enough, you just showed some clips of The Land of Dreams, where I've returned to the composite version. It reminds me of this duality. Here was masculine and the feminine. There was nature and, artificial, landscape, and all kinds of dualities. And then things are happening simultaneously. So once again, I'm asking the audience to look simultaneously at the two screens, but to be able to create the narrative and put the dots together themselves. And for sure, the interpretation and the meaning that it's given to certain audience may be very different than another, viewer. And I think that's important too, that the ambiguity and the way it's read differently by different people.
And this interaction, I know we're coming up on 40 minutes, but just to spend a few more minutes before we open it up to discussion and take questions. This idea of inhabiting a gallery, whether it's in video or photography, your experience with films like Turbulent, Rapture, and other films that people will see at the Modern, including Tuba, which is another 2-channel production. It seems that this movement affected your photography. And so if we could advance several slides forward to the Book of Kings. Here's some of the team, Shoja and Gassim there. But if we keep going, here's some behind the scenes from Asuera, Morocco. But just, yes, right here. So it seems to me, and I wonder, because it ties into Land of Dreams, because in Land of Dreams, we really occupy all of these spaces. We occupy portraiture, the installation of photography, that sense of being caught inside of a multi-channel projection in terms of video. So I wonder if you might talk briefly about moving from film installation into this idea that an installation of photography could, as in this series that we see in front of us, the Book of Kings, can witness a historical event physically, in the case here being the Green Movement inside of Iran.
First of all, Ed, I just want to elaborate on, I really like the parallel you made between the video installations and the way they're designed spatially, and let's say the Book of Kings, which is also a narrative installation. And it really makes me think about how I want to create experience. I mean, ever since The Woman of Allah, I've moved on. I'm a storyteller. I think I've become a storyteller, and I like to create experiences. And it's a very concise decision. For example, with The Land of Dreams or with this, when the audience enter the room and they're surrounded by numbers and numbers of photographs of people with their gaze on you, the viewer, and you're standing in the middle of the room, that is no different than when you are standing in the room of Turbulent and Rapture, where you're inundated inside of a story. You are in the story. Basta. You can't get out of it. You're no longer able to just judge them, but you are part of the story. And I think there's something also very emotional about not just being a passive viewer, like we've become as people who watch art. You just pass something by. When you enter a Land of Dreams, you cannot escape the sadness, the melancholy, the gazes of those faces right on you. And here with the Land of Dreams, we had a narrative about a group of innocent people who for the will of helping their nation, for their notion of patriotism, idea of democracy, they have been willing to sacrifice their lives, to give their life for their nation. Yet, that gesture of the hand over the heart is the Legion of Honor University, is the love of nation. And yet they're faced with I don't know if you have the images of the villains, at the same room, you're faced with these images. Maybe John can advance. I know, here we go. And yet we're faced with these images of the people of power that in their bodies wear violence. The illustrations from the Book of Kings, the original Book of Kings from the 10th century, where people were becoming beheaded and everything. So as the viewer, when you stand in this room, you're facing with people who are patriots, people who are the bystanders and are witnessing this revolutionary fervors. And then you're witnessing these men that ultimately hold power. And there it is. There is the three different protagonists. And when you stand in the middle of it, they're all looking at you, and you must take sides.
It's very, and there's a sense that decisions are being made. There are sitters inside of the series that feature both as a patriot and as a member of the masses. The suggestion there is that they've made the decision to emerge from being a bystander into taking action, whatever that action may mean, whatever the outcome of that action may mean to them personally. It's a very powerful piece.
And I think this contradiction between love of nation, devotion, self-sacrifice, yet violence, brutality, and genocide, which is exactly what happened during the Green Movement or the Arab Springs. All these youth who came with such great ideas that were not about overthrowing governments, but well, maybe in some cases were, but not in Iran, but to ask for some idea of democracy. And so many of these young people were imprisoned, tortured, and killed. So this became a sort of a historical narrative about a moment of Iranian history, and showing the contradictions that embodied.
Thank you very much for your openness to talk about this work. We have time for a few questions. I went a little over. I guess my moderating duties got away from me. But we do have some very good questions. And one question that I myself am curious about, Shirin, I chose Rapture for a reason. Specifically because it has an emphasis on landscape. And I very much read, and I've never told you this before, but I very much read Land of Dreams as a Western. I see it as energies that live inside of the great Westerns, being seen through the eyes of Native peoples, immigrants, voices that typically don't appear in films. Well, they appear in movies like The Searchers. But we have a question of why was New Mexico chosen as the backdrop for Land of Dreams?
Yeah,
so that would be a question.
It's an excellent question. We were talking about a very big part of the Land of Dream was how to blur the boundary between and cross our differences as people from different cultures, and how dreams are actually very common. But landscapes are very common. I come from a country that is full of beautiful desert landscape, mountains. And I and my colleagues traveled all across the country to look for landscape that resembles Iran. And so a part of the idea of Land of Dreams was to play with people's mind. Are we in Iran or are we in the US? And I think this ambiguity is very beautiful. Is this colony in Iran or is it in the US? And there's something so sacred about landscape, about deserts. I must say that I come from the desert. And whether it's New Mexico or whether it's in Iran, they're very powerful and they transcend. They don't know about our politics. Landscape geography doesn't discriminate. And there's something so beautiful about that I could be in New Mexico and feel at home, And so that was the intention, is to look in America for Iran.
Absolutely. One of the things that, as we're binge watching movies during the pandemic, that the great filmmakers of Iran, Kiarostami especially, such a magnificent sense of landscape. It's as though Iran specializes in the experience of landscape. But we have a question that I know that a lot of people will be curious to hear about, and it's a fascinating question. Are the dreams fictional or are they biographical?
An excellent question. Well, I have to say I have been collecting my own dreams, and I've even made films like Roja about my own dreams. But in this Land of Dreams, the film was scripted. And for example, the dream of the military man was an actual statement by a Hiroshima survivor that we found extremely moving. And many of it, the rest of it was written. But I wanted to add something to the people who don't know. When I photographed the people in New Mexico, I did ask them about their dreams. I became like the protagonist, Simin, and I explained about the project, and I told them how the project is about American dreams. And so every single person I photographed, I collected their dreams if they could remember. And what is written in the back of the photographs is really a kind of a loose interpretation of their dreams. But in the videos, they were scripted.
There's a great question. Maybe, I don't know, Terry, how we're doing on time.
We're good. We're okay.
Okay, so maybe a couple of more questions.
Sure.
There's I think this question is very important. This viewer has keyed in on the humanity in your work and how relatable it is to see those villains right now. And she says the social sphere has become so polarized that we can barely look at each other. Is it intentional your work to? And I guess the extension would be how does your work seek to dissolve some of those polarizations, and how does that function inside of a work like Land of Dreams?
Well, it's such an excellent question, because I think one of the things that worried me about the course of events in this country was about how divided, I say we because I consider myself an American, we have become as Americans, the conservatives and liberals, the Republicans, the Democrats, the rich, the poor, the immigrant, the non-immigrant, and the Black, the white, and this is something that has been the trajectory of our country ever since the revolution. We've had the fanatics, the religious, the non-secular versus the secular. You've had people who live outside of Iran, people who live inside of Iran. You have all kinds of divisions that it's unimaginable how, as a nation, we would imagine, we would see a day that we will come together. In fact, the last thing I can remember that we were all really united was the Green Movement, where people, regardless of whether they lived inside or outside, were religious or not religious, or rich or poor, they all supported these young people. And so this is really interesting, as the deeper this divide finds its roots, the less likely that the country or the nation can heal itself. And I think we are a terrible example, unfortunately, in Iran, where we're left with very little alternative, even if this administration goes, because the way that they have divided us as people, And I think that I still, with all its flaws, I look at this nation in America as one of the greatest countries in the world, where there is the sense of democracy and freedom and unity and hope for humanity. And that in the faces of the pictures of the Land of Dreams, you see such diverse faces of the Native Americans, the Hispanic, Latino community, the Anglo, the African American. And it's what America looks like, with all our differences, this is a country that was built by the blood of the immigrants, and this is a nation that welcomes the displaced, and that is part of the American identity, the compassionate. And you don't want to lose that. You do not, And I feel that it's part of the reason I gravitated toward making a work about America, because I so cherish that part of America that I find so rare anywhere else. And I speak passionately because I really believe it. And Ed, I used this example one last time about when last time I left Iran, devastated from the airport in Iran when they incarcerated me and would barely let me leave. And I told this story several times. I entered the airport in New York, JFK, and an African-American man welcomed me home and said, "Welcome home." And I just burst into tears. That's the America I know, that I, as an Iranian, can enter the United States and a Black man can welcome me home. And that just gives me chills. I never want to see that changed, you know. Sorry, I just sort of went off.
Well, that's an extraordinary way, I think, to complete the talk. I do want to add one more thing to what you just said, which is so powerful, is when you were in Iran that last time and you met the border police at the Tehran airport, you had contact sheets for photography, for photographs in your bag. When you come to the Modern, you will see those photographs on view from that moment. Thank you very much, Shirin. That was a wonderful human testimony, and I really do hope that all of you are safe and well and have an opportunity to join us and see this work and hang out in this great 30 years of work.
And I want to come to Texas.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We want you to come.
So do I. I miss my state terribly. Absolutely.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Sari. Thank you, every member of the museum, for working so hard and to take this exhibition. Thank you, Ed, for your time. I'm so grateful for people to make time in this historical moment.
Thank you to you both. That was a beautiful job. This will go down in the books. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who joined us tonight.